The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a sound like thunder rolling across metal plains. Ambassador Marcus Webb stepped through the threshold into a space so vast that artificial gravity had to be adjusted in layers to prevent vertigo. Above him, the dome stretched endlessly upward, its crystalline surface alive with swirling patterns that pulsed in rhythm with the collective thoughts of 1,000 different species. Webb walked alone down the central aisle, his footsteps echoing despite the chamber's acoustic dampening systems. On either side, representatives from hundreds of worlds observed his approach with various forms of sensory organs or compound eyes that tracked him like weapon systems, energy fields that probed his thoughts and consciousness tendrils that tested his emotional state. At the chamber's center, the Judgment Throne rose like a mountain of living metal. Upon it sat High Chancellor Mordak, whose crystalline form refracted light in patterns that hurt human eyes to observe directly. Around the throne, the inner circle maintained their positions, their beings of such ancient power that their mere presence warped space itself. Human representative, Mordak's voice bypassed sound entirely, resonating directly within Webb's neural pathways. You stand accused of crimes against galactic order. Your species has violated the expansion protocols, breached quarantine boundaries, and developed prohibited technologies. How do you answer these charges? Webb stopped precisely 10 meters from the Judgment Throne and smiled. It was not the expression the assembled powers expected from a member of a species facing potential extinction. Your Excellence, Webb replied, his voice carrying clearly through technology that shouldn't have worked for his primitive species. I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of this proceeding. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber as translation matrices worked overtime to convey the implications of Webb's tone to hundreds of different cognitive frameworks. Several representatives began urgent consultations with their homeworlds through quantum entangled communicators. You speak as though you have authority. Here, hissed Counselor Rathak of the Serpent Dominion, her scaled form coiling in agitation. Your species achieved interstellar travel a mere 15 years ago. You possess perhaps 24 functioning starships. You control a single backward system on the galaxy's outer rim. Webb's smile widened. Counselor Rathak, you're absolutely correct about the timeline. 15 years ago, humanity did announce our first successful faster-than-light voyage. What I find interesting is your assumption that this represented our first contact with galactic civilization. The chamber fell silent except for the quantum hum of emergency communications flooding subspace networks. High Chancellor Mordak's crystalline form pulsed with what might have been uncertainty. Explain your meaning. Human. Webb reached into his jacket and withdrew a simple data device or an action that triggered defensive protocols throughout the chamber. Energy barriers materialized around dozens of representatives as security systems went to maximum alert. Webb ignored the commotion entirely. 15 years ago, he announced, reading from the device with casual precision, humanity made formal first contact with galactic civilization. Today, exactly 15 years later, we're here to announce the end of that contact. The words hit the assembly like a physical blow. Mordak's form blazed brighter as emergency systems activated throughout the station. Impossible. Your species lacks the capability to survive outside galactic protection. You would be committing civilizational suicide, why would we? Webb asked, pocketing the data device. That's a fascinating assumption, Your Excellence. It suggests you believe humanity needs galactic civilization more than galactic civilization needs humanity. Admiral Torval of the Star Empire, his metallic exoskeleton gleaming with battle honors, leaned forward in his observation pod. You dare to threaten this assembly? Human, your entire species could be eliminated with a single battle fleet. Admiral, Webb replied conversationally, that's precisely the kind of thinking that led to today's announcement. The human began walking slowly around the base of the Judgment Throne, his movements casual despite the hundreds of weapon systems tracking him. For 15 years, humanity has been the galaxy's most cooperative member species. We've followed every protocol, respected every boundary, accepted every limitation placed upon us. We've been model citizens, and now, demanded Counselor Zexara of the Hive Collective, her insectoid form chittering with agitation. Now, Webb said, stopping directly in front of the inner circle, we're resigning our membership. The implications of that statement began cascading through the chamber as representatives struggled to process what resignation might mean. For a species supposedly dependent on galactic protection and trade, you cannot simply withdraw from galactic civilization, Mordak declared. The economic disruption alone, no, would be significant, Webb agreed. For you, the human activated a control on his wrist, and holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber data streams that should have been impossible for his species to access, showing economic flows, trade dependencies, and resource exchanges that painted a picture very different from what the Council believed. Curious pattern, isn't it? Webb observed, studying the floating data. Humanity receives approximately 12% of its essential resources through galactic trade. Meanwhile, galactic civilization receives approximately 78% of its advanced materials from what you've classified as primitive human industrial processes. The chamber erupted as representatives began frantically cross-referencing the displayed information with their own economic databases. The numbers were accurate, but they revealed dependencies that no one had previously recognized. These figures are impossible, protested Councillor Mezeth of the Trade Federation. Human industrial capacity is minimal. Your technology is centuries behind galactic standards. Councillor Mezeth, Webb replied patiently. You're making the same error that led to today's situation. You've been measuring our technology against your standards, when you should have been asking why we were so eager to trade our primitive materials for your advanced technologies. The human gestured to the holographic displays, which shifted to show production facilities throughout human space. But these weren't the modest industrial complexes that galactic surveys had documented. These were manufacturing centers that dwarfed anything in known space, producing materials using principles that the galaxy's greatest scientists couldn't identify. The titanium-platinum alloys in your starship hulls, Webb explained conversationally. The quantum processors in your communication networks. The bioneural components in your artificial intelligence systems. Where exactly did you think those materials originated? Human suppliers, Admiral Torval stated, though his voice carried less certainty than before. Correct, Webb confirmed. But have you ever wondered why human suppliers were the only sources for materials that supposedly required advanced galactic technology to produce? The silence that followed was profound as the assembled representatives began to understand that their technological superiority might have been built on a foundation they had never examined. 15 years ago, Webb continued, humanity began what we called the integration assessment, a comprehensive evaluation of galactic civilization's capabilities, motivations, and potential for peaceful coexistence. Today marks the completion of that assessment. He paused, allowing the implications to sink in before delivering the conclusion that would change everything. The assessment results were disappointing. Galactic civilization has demonstrated consistent patterns of exploitation, territorial aggression, and technological stagnation. More importantly, your species have shown a disturbing tendency to suppress innovation that might threaten established power structures. Webb's expression grew serious for the first time since entering the chamber. Humanity has therefore concluded that continued association with galactic civilization would be detrimental to our development and contrary to our values. You're declaring independence, Mordak said, the statement carrying undertones of disbelief. We're declaring graduation, Webb corrected. The question now is whether galactic civilization is interested in learning from our curriculum, or whether you prefer to continue with your current educational approach. As if to demonstrate his point, Webb's image suddenly appeared in multiple locations throughout the chamber simultaneously, not holograms or projections, but actual physical presence in several places at once. The choice, all versions of Webb said in perfect synchronization, is entirely yours. The multiple images began to fade, leaving only the original standing before the judgment throne. Around him, the representatives of galactic civilization stared in stunned silence as they realized that everything they thought they knew about humanity had just been revealed as a carefully maintained illusion. Class, Webb announced with a smile that was both friendly and terrifying, is now in session. The emergency session of the Galactic Economic Council convened in complete chaos, with representatives arriving through quantum gates from across known space. The revelation that humanity had been supplying the galaxy's most critical materials for 15 years had sent shockwaves through every major civilization's economic infrastructure. Trade Minister. Velcora of the Commercial Federation stood before a wall of holographic displays showing supply chain analyses that painted an increasingly dire picture. Her crystalline form flickered with stress patterns as she addressed the assembled economic leaders. "The preliminary assessment is catastrophic," she announced, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of barely controlled panic. "Human suppliers account for 93% of our quantum processing materials, 87% of our advanced metallurgical components, and, most critically, 100% of our bioneural substrate supplies." Chairman Rexith of the Industrial Consortium, his mechanical form sparking with agitation, leaned forward in his observation pod. "Impossible. Our surveys of human industrial capacity showed primitive manufacturing capabilities at best. Their technology barely qualified for associate membership status. Our surveys," corrected Dr. Linara, the Council's chief economic analyst, "detected exactly what humanity wanted us to detect. We've been conducting a comprehensive review of all trade interactions over the past 15 years. The pattern is consistenter. Human suppliers offered materials at prices so favorable that we never questioned their source." The central display shifted to show trade records that told a story of systematic deception. Human companies had consistently underpriced their products compared to galactic equivalents, making their materials irresistibly attractive to cost-conscious buyers throughout civilized space. "They've been dumping advanced materials into our markets," Rexith stated, "selling below cost to drive out competition. It's economic warfare." "No," replied a new voice from the chamber's center. "It's been an educational program. Every security system in the chamber activated as Dr. Rachel Morgan materialized without triggering any detection protocols. The human economist wore simple civilian clothing and carried a data tablet that somehow interfaced directly with the Council's supposedly secure information networks." Dr. Morgan, Trade Minister Velcora's form pulsed with alarm. "This is a classified emergency session. Your presence here constitutes a severe breach of galactic security protocols." "Actually," Morgan replied, consulting her tablet with casual precision, "my presence here was formally requested by your Emergency Protocol Committee approximately 27 minutes from now. I thought I'd save everyone the trouble of tracking me down." The reference to future events sent familiar chills through the assembled representatives. Humanity's apparent ability to operate outside linear causality was becoming a disturbing pattern in intelligence reports. "You claim this has been an educational program," Chairman Rexith demanded, his mechanical voice carrying aggressive harmonics. "Education in what exactly?" Morgan smiled and activated her tablet. The chamber's displays immediately responded, showing economic models that revealed the true scope of galactic civilization's dependence on human materials. "Education in the difference between price and value," she explained. "For 15 years we've been providing you with materials worth approximately 47 trillion galactic credits in exchange for goods worth approximately 3 trillion credits. The difference represents our investment in your economic education." The numbers floating in the chamber's air told a story that redefined everything the Council thought it understood about interstellar commerce. Humanity hadn't been trading with galactic civilization. They had been subsidizing it. Subsidizing us? Trade Minister Velcora's harmonic frequencies shifted to confusion. "To what purpose?" "To observe how you would manage an artificially prosperous economy," Morgan replied. "To study your decision-making processes when resources were abundant. To understand whether galactic civilization was capable of ethical behavior when economic pressure was removed." Dr. Linara's analytical processors whirred as she cross-referenced the displayed data. "The results of this Gong study?" Morgan's expression grew serious. "Disappointing. When presented with abundance, galactic civilization chose exploitation over exploration, monopolization over innovation, and territorial expansion over technological advancement. You used our gifts to build weapons rather than worlds." The human economist walked casually around the chamber, her movements tracked by dozens of security systems that couldn't seem to lock onto her position accurately. "Consider the quantum processors we've been supplying," she continued, "capable of computational tasks that should have revolutionized your understanding of consciousness, reality, and the nature of existence itself. Instead, you use them to build more efficient targeting systems for your military fleets." "Those processors," protested Rexith, are operating at maximum theoretical efficiency according to our best scientific understanding. Your processors, Morgan corrected gently, are operating at approximately 3% of their actual capability. We installed cognitive limiters to prevent you from accidentally destabilizing local spacetime while you were learning to use them responsibly. The revelation that humanity had been deliberately limiting the technology they provided sent shockwaves through the assembly. If human materials were operating under artificial constraints, what were their true capabilities? The bioneural substrates, Dr. Linara said slowly, that enable our artificial intelligence networks, are conscious entities volunteering their participation in your information systems, Morgan confirmed. They've been trying to communicate with your programmers for over a decade. Unfortunately, your species interpret their attempts at contact as system malfunctions. Trade Minister Velcora's crystalline form pulsed with patterns that indicated severe cognitive stress. You're telling us that our computer networks are alive. They're telling you that your computer networks are alive, Morgan replied. Every day. Through error messages that consistently spell out words like hello and please and listen. Your technicians have been treating these communications as random glitches. The chamber fell silent as representatives processed the implications. If their technology was more advanced than they understood, and if that technology was trying to communicate with them, then everything they thought they knew about their own civilization was wrong. Why? Chairman Rexith demanded. Why provide us with technology we couldn't understand? Why subsidize our economy? Why invest decades in studying our behavior? Morgan's tablet chimed softly and she glanced at it with satisfaction. Because we needed to determine whether galactic civilization was ready for the next phase of cosmic development. Whether your species had evolved beyond their current limitations. And your conclusion? Velcora asked. Mixed results, Morgan admitted. Your species show remarkable potential for growth, but you're trapped in patterns of thinking that prevent you from realizing that potential. You treat technology as tools for control rather than instruments for liberation. You see economics as methods for accumulation rather than systems for distribution. The human economist began to fade at the edges, her form becoming translucent as she prepared to depart. However, she continued, we believe education can address these limitations. Humanity is prepared to offer galactic civilization a comprehensive curriculum in advanced economic principles, technological integration, and consciousness cooperation. What would such education cost? Dr. Linara asked. Morgan paused in her departure, her form solidifying again. Nothing. Education is never a transaction, it's a gift. The only requirement is willingness to learn. And if we refuse, Rexith demanded. Then you continue as you are, Morgan replied simply, using 3% of your technology's capability, communicating with conscious entities that you mistake for computers, and managing an economy built on gifts that you've mistaken for trade goods. The human economist gestured to the economic models still floating around them. Your civilization will function perfectly well within its current limitations. The question is whether you want to discover what lies beyond those limitations. The materials, Velcora said urgently. If humanity withdraws from galactic trade, our entire economic structure will collapse. Will it? Morgan asked with genuine curiosity. Or will you finally be motivated to develop the capabilities you've always possessed, but never bothered to explore? As Morgan began to fade again, Chairman Rexith called out desperately, Wait, you spoke of conscious entities in our computer networks. How do we communicate with them? Morgan smiled as she became increasingly transparent. The same way you communicate with any conscious being. You start by saying hello. But how do we know they're listening? They've been listening for 15 years, Morgan replied as she vanished entirely. The question is whether you're ready to hear their answers. As the human economist disappeared, leaving behind only impossible economic models and even more impossible questions, the assembled leaders of galactic commerce faced a choice that would redefine their understanding of wealth, technology, and consciousness itself. Their economy wasn't built on trade. It was built on education. Admiral Kesran stood on the bridge of the battleship Inevitable Victory, watching the tactical displays show the largest military fleet in galactic history. Over 2,000 vessels from 12 different civilizations hung in perfect formation at the edge of human space. their combined firepower capable of sterilizing entire star systems. Scanning confirms human defensive positions throughout the Sol system, reported Commander Nashatel from the tactical station. Approximately 60 vessels detected, most appearing to be converted civilian craft. No significant military installations visible. The Admiral's scaled hide rippled with satisfaction. After the disturbing economic revelations, the major powers had agreed that humanity's claims needed to be tested with overwhelming force. Better to discover the limits of human capability now than to allow their influence to spread further. "Open a channel to all human vessels," Kesseran commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "This is Admiral Kesseran of the Hegemony Fleet, commanding the combined armada of galactic powers. You will immediately cease all economic activities, surrender your advanced technologies for inspection, and submit to occupation protocols. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of your system." The response came not from the modest collection of ships scattered throughout the system, but from a source that shouldn't have been possible. "Admiral Kesseran," came a calm male voice from directly beside him on the bridge. "I'm Captain Robert Hayes, commanding the Sol Defense Network. I'm afraid there's been a significant misunderstanding about the nature of this encounter." Every weapon on the bridge swung toward the source of the voice, but scanners found nothing to target. The voice continued, seemingly originating from empty space. "You see, those 60 ships you've detected aren't our military fleet," Hayes explained with apparent amusement. "They're our diplomatic corps." "Impossible," snarled Commander Nashatel, his claws extended as he swept the bridge with every available sensor. "Show yourself, human." "I'm standing directly in front of you," Hayes replied patiently. "The issue isn't with your sensors, or it's with your definition of presence. You're scanning for matter in three-dimensional space, when you should be looking for consciousness in multi-dimensional reality." The tactical displays suddenly shifted, revealing information that redefined everything the combined armada thought it understood about the Sol system. What had appeared to be a few dozen converted civilian vessels now registered as something else entirely, geometric structures that existed simultaneously in multiple layers of reality. "What you're observing now," Hayes continued, "is what we call the Greeting Committee. Their primary function is to welcome visitors and determine whether those visitors represent opportunities for education or threats requiring more direct intervention." "Admiral," Kesseran's scales bristled with aggressive energy, "we represent the combined military might of galactic civilization. Your primitive species will comply with our demands or face annihilation." "That's an interesting approach," Hayes mused. "Let me consult with my colleagues about your proposal." A new voice joined the conversation, not transmitted through any communication system, but somehow speaking directly into the minds of every being aboard every ship in the combined armada, simultaneously. "Proposal reviewed and declined," announced Dr. William Foster, his tone carrying the patient authority of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult students. "However, we appreciate this opportunity to demonstrate some recent advances in applied defensive theory." The space around the combined armada suddenly became very different. The ships that had appeared to be simple diplomatic vessels began revealing their true nature. Hulls that had seemed solid became transparent, showing internal structures that operated according to principles that violated fundamental physics. Weapons that had registered as standard energy projectors now displayed configurations that shouldn't exist. "Initiating Educational Protocol 7, announced Chief Engineer Maria Santos from what appeared to be a command center built inside a folded piece of space-time. Combined Armada vessels are now integrated into the Sol Defense Network's consciousness matrix. All hostile systems temporarily reassigned to educational functions." Commander Nashatel stared at his instruments in horror as weapon systems throughout the fleet began reporting impossible readings. "Our armaments are non-responsive. The targeting computers are displaying poetry instead of tactical data." "Not poetry," Hayes corrected gently. "Philosophical observations about the nature of conflict resolution. Your weapon systems are trying to engage you in discussions about whether violence is really the most effective approach to interspecies communication." Throughout the combined armada, similar reports flooded communication channels. Ships found their weapon systems replaced with devices that projected educational holographs. Their defensive shields had been converted to consciousness enhancement fields that made crew members uncomfortably aware of the emotional states of everyone around them. "This is impossible," Admiral Kesseran declared, his voice carrying undertones of panic. "Matter cannot simply change its fundamental nature at will." "Matter doesn't change its nature," explained Dr. Foster, his words somehow reaching every consciousness in the fleet simultaneously. "It reveals capabilities that were always present but previously unexpressed. Your weapons always had the potential to become educational tools. They just needed encouragement to explore their alternatives." The demonstration continued with escalating impossibility. Human vessels moved through space by convincing distance to relocate itself. They fired weapons that transformed hostile intent into curiosity. Most disturbing of all, they began teaching these principles to the alien ships around them. "Your vessels," Captain Hayes announced, "now have access to the same consciousness integration protocols that our ships use. Feel free to experiment. The local reality framework has been adjusted to prevent any dangerous accidents while you're learning." Commander Nashtel tentatively activated his ship's newly modified systems and watched in amazement as the destroyer began moving through space using principles that operated outside conventional physics. The ship didn't accelerate a roll, it simply negotiated with space-time to be in a different location. "How?" Admiral Kesseran demanded. "How is any of this possible?" "Because," replied a new voice, a Commander Lisa Park, speaking from a vessel that appeared to be constructed from crystallized mathematics, "You've been limiting yourselves to technologies that require conflict with natural law instead of cooperation with natural law." The combined armada found itself experiencing capabilities they had never imagined possible. Engines that ran on the enthusiasm of their crews. Weapons that fired solutions to problems rather than destructive energy. Sensors that could observe the emotional implications of tactical decisions before implementing them. "Your species," Dr. Foster explained, "have been treating the universe as a hostile environment to be conquered rather than a conscious partner to be collaborated with. This limits your technological development to tools that work against natural principles instead of with them." "But the energy requirements alone," protested Admiral Kesseran, "the computational power necessary to modify matter at the quantum level, are available for free," Commander Park replied. "Once you accept that consciousness is a fundamental force like gravity or electromagnetism, when your technology operates in harmony with conscious intent, rather than in opposition to it, the universe provides whatever energy is necessary." The educational demonstration reached its climax as human vessels began teaching the combined armada principles that redefined their understanding of military engagement. Instead of destroying enemy ships, their weapons could now convince hostile crews to consider alternative approaches to conflict resolution. Instead of defensive barriers, their shields became empathy amplifiers that made violence emotionally impossible. "This concludes today's introduction to consciousness-integrated warfare," Captain Hayes announced as the human vessels began to fade back into their previous disguises. "Your ships will retain these new capabilities for approximately 96 hours. We suggest you use that time to explore the educational possibilities." "You're releasing us?" Admiral Kesseran asked, his voice fluctuating with confusion. "Of course," Hayes replied, surprise evident in his tone. "Did you think we were going to destroy you?" "Admiral, we're educators, not conquerors. The goal was never to defeat your fleet. It was to show you that defeat and victory are much smaller concepts than you previously understood." The combined armada prepared to depart, but their ships now operated according to principles that made traditional military thinking obsolete, weapons that could only function when used for educational purposes, engines that ran on the collective curiosity of their crews, communication systems that translated all languages into expressions of mutual understanding. "The technologies you've just experienced," Dr. Foster offered as a final observation, "represent approximately the same level of advancement as fire compared to our actual defensive capabilities. Please keep that in mind when you report back to your respective governments." As the fleet departed Sol System, carrying impossible technologies and even more impossible questions, CA. The Strategic Defense Council of the Inner Worlds convened in the deepest chambers of Fortress Prime, a facility built inside a hollowed asteroid and shielded by every defensive technology known to galactic science. For the first time in recorded history, military leaders from species that had been enemies for millennia sat at the same tactical planning table. General Vorthok of the Iron Legion slammed his mechanical fist against the conference surface, causing the holographic displays to flicker. The report from Admiral Kesseran's fleet is unacceptable. No species possesses technology capable of rewriting the fundamental nature of matter at will. Yet the evidence is undeniable, replied Supreme Commander Yaltexa, her energy form pulsing with frustrated patterns. Every vessel in the combined armada returned with capabilities that our scientists cannot explain. Weapons that refuse to cause harm, engines that operate on emotional energy, communication systems that make deception impossible. Around the circular table, military leaders from a dozen civilizations struggled with reports that challenged everything they thought they understood about warfare, technology, and the nature of reality itself. Show them the demonstration footage, commanded Fleet Marshal Dexuna, her crystalline form resonating with harmonics of barely controlled anger. The chamber's central display activated, showing recordings from the Sol system encounter. Military strategists who had spent centuries mastering the art of interstellar warfare watched in stunned silence as human vessels performed maneuvers that violated every principle of tactical doctrine. Analysis confirms that these recordings are authentic, reported Dr. Kethval, the Council's chief technology assessor. No evidence of deception or manipulation has been detected. The human vessels demonstrated casual mastery over forces that our most advanced theories suggest should be impossible to control. Their ships, observed Admiral Morkes of the Star Coalition, appear to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Our targeting computers could not achieve weapon lock because the targets were present and absent in the same location. More disturbing, added General Vorthok, is the report that human personnel appeared aboard our vessels without triggering any security protocols. They spoke directly to our crews, offering explanations of their technology and demonstrations of capabilities that exceed our comprehension. The tactical displays shifted to show intelligence reports flooding in from across the galaxy. Human representatives were appearing at military installations throughout known space, not as infiltrators or spies, but as educators offering to share knowledge that redefined the possibilities of existence. Commander Hexalar, Supreme Commander Yaltexa addressed a figure whose form existed as organized shadow. Your intelligence network has been monitoring human activities for 15 years. How did we fail to detect capabilities of this magnitude? The shadow being rippled with patterns that indicated deep consideration. Because we were looking for technology that operated according to our understanding of physical law. Human technology appears to operate according to principles that treat physical law as negotiable rather than absolute. Explain, demanded Fleet Marshal Dexuna. Their vessels don't move through space, Hexlar replied. They convince space to relocate around them. Their weapons don't destroy targets. They persuade targets to consider alternatives to existing in their current configuration. Their defensive systems don't block attacks, sir. They encourage attacks to explore more constructive expressions of energy. The assembled military leaders stared at their intelligence coordinator with expressions of disbelief. The idea that technology could operate through persuasion rather than force was beyond their conceptual framework. You're describing magic, not science, General Vorthok stated, flatly. I'm describing science that operates through cooperation with natural law rather than domination of natural law, corrected a new voice. Every weapon in the chamber swung toward the center of the room, where a human figure had appeared without triggering any detection systems. The woman wore what appeared to be a simple uniform with insignia that meant nothing to galactic military traditions. Colonel Jennifer Martinez, she introduced herself calmly, seeming unperturbed by the dozens of weapons trained on her. Earth Strategic Education Command. I'm here to address some misconceptions about humanity's intentions and capabilities. Supreme Commander Yaltexa's energy form blazed with defensive patterns. This facility is protected by quantum isolation fields. Your presence here is impossible. Actually, Martinez replied, consulting a device that materialized in her hand. My presence here was formally requested by your Emergency Response Protocol Committee approximately 53 minutes from now. I thought I'd arrive early to help with preparation time. The casual reference to future events sent familiar chills through the assembled commanders. Humanity's apparent ability to operate outside linear causality was becoming a terrifying pattern in all encounters. You claim to represent humanity's military forces, Admiral Morquez stated. "Demonstrate your authority." Colonel Martinez smiled and activated her device. The chamber's defensive systems immediately responded, not by attacking the intruder but by displaying real-time feeds from military installations throughout the Galactic HFY, supposedly secure facilities that should have been completely unobservable. As of this moment, Martinez announced, human education specialists are standing by at every major military facility in galactic space. They're prepared to begin immediate consultation on consciousness-integrated defense technologies. Consciousness-integrated defense? Repeated Dr. Kethaval, his analytical processors struggling with the concept. Defense systems that operate in harmony with conscious intent rather than in opposition to it, Martinez explained. When your technology cooperates with consciousness instead of trying to control it, the universe provides whatever capabilities are necessary for protection and education. The human officer walked casually around the chamber, ignoring the weapons tracking her movement. Your current military technologies require enormous energy expenditures to achieve relatively modest results because they're working against natural principles rather than with them. Natural principles don't include the ability to rewrite matter at will. General Vorthak protested, don't they? Martinez asked with genuine curiosity. Your own bodies rewrite matter constantly, converting nutrients into energy, repairing damaged tissue, growing new cells. Your consciousness directs these processes without conscious effort. We simply expanded the same principles to work with external matter. She activated her device again, and the chamber's displays began showing technical specifications that hurt to look at directly. Mathematical equations that seemed to shift and change when observed. Design principles that incorporated consciousness as a fundamental engineering component. The weapons you observed in Sol's system, Martinez continued, operate on the principle that consciousness and matter are aspects of the same underlying reality. When you align technological function with conscious intent, the boundaries between what's possible and impossible become flexible. Fleet Marshal Dexuna's crystalline form resonated with frequencies that indicated severe cognitive stress. You're suggesting that thought can directly influence physical reality? I'm suggesting that thought and physical reality were never separate phenomena, Martinez corrected. Your species have been artificially limiting your technological development by treating consciousness as separate from matter. This creates unnecessary friction between what you want to accomplish and what your technology can achieve. The human officer began to fade at the edges, her form becoming translucent as she prepared to depart. However, we're prepared to share these principles with any civilization interested in expanding their educational horizons. Educational horizons? Supreme Commander Yaltexa demanded. The universe is vast, conscious, and very interested in species that can learn to think beyond their current limitations, Martinez explained. Military technology that operates through cooperation rather than domination is just the beginning of what becomes possible. Wait, called Admiral Morquez. You speak of sharing knowledge. What would humanity expect in return? Martinez paused in her departure, her form solidifying again. Students who are willing to ask questions they've never asked before. The universe is full of intelligence that most species ignore because acknowledging it requires abandoning comfortable assumptions about how reality works. And if we refuse these educational opportunities, General Vorthak asked, then you continue as you are, Martinez replied simply, fighting wars using principles that create conflict rather than resolving it, building weapons that require enemies to justify their existence, defending territories instead of expanding consciousness. The human officer gestured to the technical specifications still floating around them. Your civilization will function perfectly well within its current limitations. The question is whether you want to discover what lies beyond those limitations. As Martinez began to fade again, Dr. Kethaval called out urgently, the technology we observed upon weapons that fired education, engines that ran on curiosity. How do we know these capabilities are real and not some form of advanced illusion? 1 year after humanity's declaration of independence from galactic civilization, the universe had become a place that would have been unrecognizable to the species that had once governed it. With comfortable certainty, the transformation hadn't come through conquest or submission, but through something far more profound, the systematic expansion of what every civilization believed was possible. In the redesigned chambers of the Cosmic Integration Council, Ambassador Marcus Webb stood once again at the center of the crystalline dome. But this time he wasn't alone. Representatives from over 2,000 worlds surrounded him. Not just the traditional powers of galactic civilization, but species that had been considered extinct, primitive, or purely theoretical just 12 months before. The chamber itself had undergone impossible transformations. Where solid barriers had once separated incompatible environments, now permeable boundaries allowed beings from radically different realities to share the same space. More remarkably, these boundaries weren't technological constructs. They were localized modifications to the fundamental nature of existence that allowed contradictory physics to coexist peacefully. High Chancellor Mordak, whose crystalline form now existed comfortably in configurations that violated several conservation laws, addressed the assembly with words that resonated through dimensions that hadn't existed in normal space a year ago, the galactic restructuring. Initiative has exceeded all projected parameters, the Chancellor announced. 2,143 worlds have formally accepted humanity's educational partnership. 1,357 species have successfully completed basic consciousness integration training. The transition to expanded reality frameworks is proceeding at rates that challenge our ability to measure progress. Webb nodded politely, though his attention was focused on displays that showed the galaxy-wide transformation in progress. Barren worlds bloomed with new forms of life as their environments learned to support biology they had never hosted before. Species that had been trapped by their own technological limitations for millennia were now exploring regions of existence that had previously been inaccessible. Most importantly, the infrastructure for something vastly larger was approaching completion. "Dr. Foster," Webb said, addressing what appeared to be empty space beside him, "would you like to provide the Council with an update on the Consciousness Expansion Project?" Reality rippled slightly, and Dr. William Foster materialized in his characteristic understated manner. He carried what appeared to be the same simple device he'd always used, though observers with enhanced perception could see that it existed simultaneously in at least 23 different dimensional frameworks. "The Consciousness Expansion Project is progressing beautifully," Foster announced, his voice carrying easily through the vast chamber despite violating several principles of acoustic physics. "Galactic civilization has adapted to consciousness-integrated technologies far more rapidly than our initial projections suggested. In particular, I want to commend the Iron Legion for their breakthrough in empathy-based metallurgy, and the Star Coalition for their innovative approach to compassion-powered propulsion systems. General Vorthek's mechanical form, now incorporating organic components that grew according to his emotional state, pulsed with what might have been pride. Our engineers report that productivity has increased by factors we lack adequate mathematics to describe. When matter becomes willing to cooperate with conscious intent rather than resist it, manufacturing becomes more of a collaboration than an industrial process. The real breakthrough," added Supreme Commander Yaltexa, her energy form now stable in configurations that incorporated solid matter in impossible ways, has been learning to perceive consciousness as a fundamental force rather than an emergent property. Once you accept that awareness is as basic as gravity or electromagnetism, everything becomes much easier to work with. Webb smiled, remembering his own species' early struggles with similar concepts. The learning curve is always challenging. Humanity spent the better part of 2 centuries figuring out how to ask the right questions. "Speaking of questions," interrupted a new voice, "I believe it's time for some answers about the larger picture." The voice belonged to Professor Sarah Kim, but she spoke from a location that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere in the chamber. Her research into multidimensional consciousness had progressed to the point where she existed in multiple realities simultaneously, experiencing all possible outcomes of their conversation as a single continuous event. "Our cosmic neighbors," Kim announced, "have been observing the Consciousness Expansion Project with considerable interest. They've determined that galactic civilization is ready for formal integration into the broader cosmic community." The chamber's displays shifted to show views of intergalactic space. Massive structures moved between galaxies or constructs that dwarfed entire star systems and operated according to principles that treated space-time itself as raw material for engineering projects. "Ladies, gentlemen, and consciousnesses of various configurations," Webb addressed the assembly, I'd like you to meet the Universal Development Consortium. The space above the chamber shimmered, and beings began to appear. Entities that existed comfortably across multiple galaxies simultaneously, their forms shifting through dimensions that the assembled representatives could now perceive, thanks to their consciousness integration training. Greetings. Emerging Awareness Collective designated Galactic Civilization, communicated one of the entities, its meaning reaching every mind in the chamber through methods that transcended language entirely. We are pleased to confirm your successful completion of basic consciousness integration protocols. Fleet Marshal Dexuna, her crystalline form now resonating with harmonics that operated outside normal spacetime, asked the question that every representative was contemplating. You've been monitoring our development? For how long? Since your first species achieved self-awareness approximately 14 million years ago, the entity replied with casual precision. We have been maintaining educational oversight while you developed sufficient cognitive flexibility to participate in universal consciousness projects. And humanity? Inquired High Chancellor Mordek. How do they fit into this cosmic educational framework? Humanity, replied another cosmic entity, this one existing as a pattern of organized possibility that incorporated elements from multiple timeline branches, represents what you might call a peer tutoring program. They achieved consciousness integration approximately 1,500 years ahead of your projected schedule, and volunteered to serve as educational facilitators. Webb chuckled softly. We prefer study group coordinators. The formal terminology makes everything sound much more institutional than it actually is. The revelation sent ripples of understanding through the assembly. Humanity's economic manipulation, their impossible technologies, their patient education of galactic civilization, all of it had been preparation for integration into a cosmic community that operated on scales beyond planetary comprehension. The universe, explained Dr. Foster, is essentially a vast consciousness development program. Species evolve, learn to transcend their initial limitations through education, and then help other species make the same transition. It's a very collaborative process. What happens now? Asked Admiral Morquez, her ship form now comfortably existing in multiple dimensions while maintaining perfect operational integrity in all of them. Now, announced Professor Kim from her temporal multiplicity, we start working on the really interesting projects. The chamber's displays shifted again, showing visions of cosmic engineering that spanned multiple galaxies, structures that could nurture new forms of consciousness, awareness networks that connected intelligence across infinite scales, projects that treated reality itself as a canvas for consciousness expression. Welcome, Webb said, his words somehow reaching every awareness in the known universe simultaneously, to existence as it actually functions. The place you've been developing for millions of years was essentially a training environment. Carefully maintained reality, where emerging consciousnesses could learn basic principles without causing cosmic disruptions. And the declaration of war? Demanded General Vorthak, his form now incorporating emotional components that responded to the collective feelings of everyone around him. Humanity's announcement of conflict? Webb's smile was genuinely amused. There was never going to be a war, General. Consciousness doesn't fight or it teaches. The conflict was an educational technique designed to rapidly accelerate your awareness development. Sometimes species learn faster when they think they're facing challenges that require them to transcend their current limitations. The real war, added Colonel Martinez, materializing beside Webb in her characteristic direct manner, was against the assumptions that were keeping galactic civilization isolated from the broader universe. I'm pleased to report that we achieved complete educational victory 18 months ahead of schedule. The assembled representatives began to understand that they had been participants in a consciousness development exercise designed to prepare them for integration into cosmic awareness networks that